I'd like to introduce to you Mr. David Pickup, who comes from us from Dallas. He is a conservative Christian, self-proclaimed, licensed marriage and family psychotherapist, experienced reparative therapist, and board member of the National Association of Research and Therapy for Homosexuality. David.
Thank you. I am just completely honored to be here. Let me get this right. This better?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so completely honored to be here. I can't tell you how important it is. I almost don't have words. In my experience and in my faith and in my psychological practice, I don't find the words sometimes to tell you how important it is that we speak the truth, and we speak the truth with compassion. That's what my work is all about. I consider my therapeutic practice not just a therapeutic practice, even though it does involve professional licensure, but I consider it my personal ministry to the Lord. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that later in the day. But as this title suggests of the program this morning, I'm going to explain to you some fundamental things about the nature of gender and sexuality that I believe you're going to find is going to mirror the great, profound design of God for men and women and their relationships. Today, I bring you both a story of great woe and tribulation and grievous experiences, but I also bring you stories of ultimate change and victory and much hope. And so to do that, first of all, I'm going to tell you what gay activists, the media, even some churches, psychologists, politicians are trying to keep from you. And the reason why I know they're trying to do this en masse is because I know some of these people. And I've spoken for state legislatures about 8 times already in different states this year. And I know what's going on. And they can't stand it when some of us who attend these legislative meetings, political, religious, whatever, and speak what is so clearly the truth. They introduce evidence that are based on lies and cherry-picking research and falsehoods, and we're going to hear a little bit about that today. But they are doing their best to make sure that people like me are demeaned, and because they don't have the truth, the only weapon they have is make people think that we're bigoted and some right-wing, extreme, hateful group of people. And when I get in front of an audience, I turn out to be not the type of person they expect, and they kind of panic. And so the only other weapon they have is to just try to ignore. So that's what's going on in the world today. And I'm glad it's already been said that you're going to be affected today. I really believe this, and I'm going to show you a little bit why today I think that you're going to find out the onslaught that is indeed coming just down the street. It's already started. And we'll also do a Q&A so we can answer any questions that you might have to explain as much as we can today and to help you prepare for the future. And I may say, just as importantly, prepare your children for the future that we are about to leave them. So, homosexuality in children and adults. Let me just, this is going to be kind of free format. Let me just open it up for a second. Who knows what the emotional causes are for homosexuality? Anybody? It doesn't matter if you don't know, that's all right, but I just wanted to kind of take a poll. But besides just what is true and what we hear in our churches, we know there's a spirit of worldliness. That's everything's stops and starts with God. We know that. But other than just strictly spiritual matters, do you know by chance the deeper causes? Have you ever heard of the deeper causes of homosexuality? Okay, one guy. All right, great. Well, good. That's why I'm glad I'm here, because not many people know, and I'm here to tell you what my personal and my professional experience is with these issues. And by the way, let me say, because I do reparative therapy does not mean that reparative therapy trumps the healing of God. It doesn't mean that reparative therapy is something separate and secular from God. I could turn it into that if I was a secularist, but I don't. Reparative therapy wasn't designed alongside the scripture when it was created by Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, but I want to assure you, and hopefully you'll see this later as well, reparative therapy, the real thing, not the junk that you can look on the internet or your iPhones right now and see the horror stories about supposedly what reparative therapy is. I do the real thing, authentic reparative therapy. You're going to find out what that's all about right now. And first we start with the causes. There we go. There are three main causes. We're talking about emotional causes that affect a child, first of all, and then an adult. That things that they experience or don't experience that do not reflect God's design for gender and sexuality. And I'm going to tell you what's underneath all the homosexual feelings. By the way, I have two practices. The main one's in Dallas, the other one's in LA. And about 95% of all my clients are men, boys and men from 15 to 32-ish, who are all dealing with what we call same-sex attraction. So, the first main cause, and I'm going to present these really simplistically, but I'm going to go over them in detail so you can really get this. But if you don't want to miss one thing, this is the slide you want to get and be aware of. The first major cause is a sense of severe gender identity inferiority. I'm not talking about just the kind of, let's say a 21-year-old is there and says, I don't feel very confident in my own manhood right now. I'm talking about a very severe emotional sense of gender identity inferiority or shame. When I say the word shame today, I'm not talking about guilt. Guilt is biblical. Guilt is actually, doesn't feel good, but it is good for us. It keeps us from robbing banks and such, right? Okay, so we're talking about shame. Shame carries with it the idea that it's not biblical. Shame carries the idea that I am worthless. Instead of being fearfully and wonderfully made, as the scripture says, I am worthless. I am not a real man, even though I was born a man. With the added proviso, it feels like to a guy that I'll never be man enough. I'm unforgivable. That's not even scriptural. That's the kind of depth of shame we're talking about, that a guy feels, or even a boy feels shamed in his spirit, in his body, that he's worthless as a man. It's really a severe case of this, and I'll tell you how that plays out in just a minute. The second cause is also something severe, severely unmet emotional needs from the primary role models for male identity. Sometimes that's the father relationship. There's something that doesn't quite fit, or something that's traumatic about the father relationship. And also it could be not so much that. It could be, I have clients whose peers, through bullying and shaming incidents in his young, innocent boy's life, he really gets hit hard emotionally. Wouldn't you know it, during the first stage where gender and sexuality are first starting to be formed, and that's somewhere between 2 and 5, 6, 7 years of age. These are severe cases. Just to give you a depth of how severe that might be, I know one guy who did this therapy quite successfully, and think about your most loving father experience. Those of you who have had, we'll just call them good, loving father-son experiences. Do you ever remember your dad throwing you up in the air as a kid, or joking around with you, or even disciplining you, but you knew he cared about you, and you had some wonderful experiences where he touched you and he held you in his arms sometimes, and he was, even though he may have been strict according to God's scripture, that was great, but yet you still had a confidence, and you kind of wanted to be like that kind of thing, and you felt connected on some level. Not that you didn't have your conflicts, but on your basic core level, you just had a feeling that he truly cared about you, and he reached out for you. The gay man doesn't know what that feels like. One guy that I know who went through this therapy successfully, he was never touched by his father until he was about 13. Maybe that sounds okay for some of you, maybe that sounds kind of weird, I don't know. But as a psychotherapist, for there to be a split in that kind of relationship where there's no real emotional connection, the problem is that when a little boy doesn't get the affirmation of his male identity from the primary role models, whoever that might be, father, peers, what have you, and when he doesn't get connected emotionally through affection, approval, in other words, unconditional love, he doesn't feel that connectivity at such a young age. He doesn't know how to handle it. His defense mechanisms automatically come up. And unfortunately, when he doesn't know this because it happens automatically, if it's that strong of an issue, that deep, unfortunately, when he disattaches from the primary role models, male role models, he disattaches from himself. Nobody really hears this a lot, so I want you to get that. You might guess right now how tough that might be for a kid to experience some of these traumatic things and then to not experience what they, deep in their hearts, they always long for. So it's this salient male quality that they don't have an experience of. Their relationships are surface or out and out antagonistic. Now, before I go on, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. Today is not, or any day, is not about blaming. It's about naming whatever the truth is. I'm not here to be judgmental on fathers or even peers, mothers, any of that. But there is something, in fact, that does happen or does not happen that needs to a child that creates, that no one realizes, that creates a very severe case of these issues. So I must tell the truth based on my experience and what I know really works. I must tell the truth. So I'm not, on the other hand, I'm not here to judge people. I'm here to support people, mothers, fathers, and clients who have these issues. All right, and the third one might be obvious, but it's sexual abuse by same-sex older boys or men. It's just kind of obvious. If you're sexually abused when you're 5 years of age by a pedophile, your sexual organs are stimulated. And so when that happens, that opens up sexual pathway, first of all, way too early, and second of all, in a way that's not designed for heterosexuality. And so it opens that child's mind up to that experience, and then later on, that experience very likely, not 100%, but very likely can just come up automatically, even because of this reason alone. And so maybe one day as a teenager, some older guy or man shows them the love and attention that they never got, or affirmation, and approaches them, and they sometimes fall prey to this because of the unmet needs, and because their bodies remember that stimulation. So these are the three causes. This is what the world is trying their best to keep from you. I'll tell you a little bit later why exactly I believe this, or more about that, but this is the information that gay activists and the world, psychologists even, on some of the largest psychological institutions, they are trying their best to, in fact, sometimes it reaches the level of screaming and vociferousness and vehemence, and they they're driven, basically, to keep this information low, or to dispute it, or to demean it. And in my opinion, the research and the anecdotal evidence, even though there's not enough research, there does admittedly need to be more research done. And I pride myself on having an open mind to anything. There is evidence that tends to bear out the truth of what I'm saying today. So hopefully you'll get this. Now I'm going to move on to give you a more specific kind of play-by-play incident of this is not a comprehensive case of homosexuality, but it's a typical case that's true for most guys who deal with these issues. And by the way, I can answer some questions about lesbianism, but I'm not going to be dealing with lesbianism today. We're going to be dealing just today with male homosexuality, if that's okay with you guys. All right, so here we go. A boy is born. He's got a growing male identity designed by God. And then there's that, I just put it in black because it's kind of a dark period of time that sometimes is known, sometimes goes under the rug, and it is not known. But these are the kinds of occurrences I was talking about a few minutes ago. Some version of a loss of father, a loss of the 3 A's. Also, that usually I hear from most clients is they felt overly attached to mom. Now, moms love their children, and sometimes there's an enmeshment that takes place. The mommy's good little boy thing attaches too much to the child. And the boy, if it's such an early phase when that boy is automatically, according to God's design, is negotiating femininity and maleness, trying to find his own identity in a natural way, boys normally go to their fathers for their identity. It just happens automatically. But if there's some kind of upset, they only have one other person to go back to for identity needs, and that's, of course, the feminine. And so it's not true for everybody, but a lot of times there's an over-enmeshment, which makes masculinity a non-secure, unrealized sense of the fullness of that journey from boyhood to manhood. Next item is the shamed male self. You've all heard the stories. Look, bullying is not just the problem in and of itself. It's a horrible thing. But bullying also, the dark gift, if you will, of bullying is it leads to this gender identity sense of inferiority. And that shuts a boy's, I'll call it male programming down, to use 21st century terms. So during this period of time, even though it may be totally repressed because children can't deal with things like abandonment. They're not adults. They don't have adult brains. They're reacting emotionally. This is where defense mechanisms, this is where kids decide, most of the time, I believe, unconsciously, to just shove all that stuff down. All these really rough experiences, even if it's neglect, really, it's not something children can usually handle. So they learn how to deal with it by just kind of not dealing with it. You probably all heard of repression. Well, that's what it's like. An automatic, I can't deal with this, and so I'm going to just shut it down. Unfortunately, as we know, repressed issues usually come up to haunt us later. So you might imagine then that the last item on this list, and by the way, there are more items, but the last item on this list is all about pain. This is where the tragedy and the pain of severe unmet needs and a confused sense of gender begin to originate. There's all different levels of this, but I want to assure you, this is what my clients are telling me, and I respect their own individual rights and their own individual voices. They tell me this is what's at the bottom of their homosexual feelings. Okay, so moving on, there's the defense mechanism. It goes on top of the self. And on top of that, shame-based statements. On top of that, defense and detachment. In other words, when it's severe enough, if a guy learns that maleness is something that he goes, I don't like that. Either it's a distance from male role models that he just doesn't get and detaches, or sometimes the maleness is hurtful to him during the gender development stage, and so he, out of defensiveness, he'll detach himself. So there's that area. He doesn't really live in his body in a very subjective felt happy, satisfying sense, unfortunately, like most boys do. And because that stuff is hard to deal with, this is very common. There's a kind of happy or false self that is, this is why you hear things like, he's a good little boy, even when he turns 21, he's kind of still stuck, kind of innocent, and it's kind of, it fools you sometimes, because we're not talking about hypocriticalness here. We're not talking about some guy who's evil or horrible or, done something to deserve this in any way. Not at all. But he, to save himself in a sense, he'll reach a kind of, in a sense, a false self, and many times it'll appear, not that they don't have problems, but many times it'll appear as, oh, everything's okay. I don't know if you guys in this church experienced this ever, but in my church and several churches I've been to, again, I'm not, this is not trying to be judgmental, but sometimes we walk in church and, hey, how you doing? Fine? And we go on our way. And a lot of times the pain that people feel are not, if we only see people, Sundays and Wednesdays or whatever, a lot of times people really aren't talking about their authentic things they're going. Maybe it's because of shame, or we feel embarrassed about issues, or we feel like we'll be weak people of faith. And that's kind of the same mechanism that goes on here. There's kind of a happy, not totally authentic, unintentionally, but not totally authentic person that develops. All right, so this covers all these issues up. And then, if a guy walks in my office, that's me, that's T, that's therapist. And then I move towards him as his therapist, and we do, I won't get into much technicality, but I do psychodynamic techniques. And all that means is that he and I have a trusted, confidential, professional relationship. And so he's able to, with that trust, slowly begin to peel these layers away through emotional processes that many times, especially for clients who are people of faith, involves or can involve their spirituality. I'll explain a little bit about that in the next segment, but I do, about what actually happens in session for some guys that's really a significant spiritual experience. So through these emotional processes, we go below, this is important for you to know, below the homosexual feelings. We go right to the root causes. We find underneath all the homosexual feelings and acting out that underneath that are all these issues. And so when we begin to chip away and finally begin to emotionally resolve these issues, these things begin to drop away. And where does he end up finally in this totally trusted relationship? Back there. He finally faces what's going on below the homosexual feelings. For instance, he might tell me about a guy or a internet viewing he's had in which he's been very sexually attracted to this guy. So we go underneath of these emotional processes, and finally, automatically, this is not forcing anybody to feel anything, not at all. We find automatically that these feelings come up. And can you imagine how the guy, I'm going to ask you, how do you think a 15-year-old or a 29-year-old or a 50-year-old reacts when he finally discovers all these issues? You can answer freely if you want. What do you think he's going to experience in the office with me if he finally discovers all these really tough things?
Total breakdown.
Yeah. Pretty much, and sometimes it comes in waves. Sometimes tears come a little bit as we move further in. It doesn't happen. It's not cookie cutter therapy. I respect each individual's own unique experience, but generally speaking, that's what happens. And I've had guys say things to me like, in tears, all I really wanted was for that guy to love me. That's all I really wanted. I just wanted him to hug me. Or things like, I never knew what it felt like to have a guy put his arms around me and look right at me and approve of me. I don't know what that feels like to be connected to. I mean, men were hateful to me. Boys were hateful to me. I thought I was, you know, I hated them. I hated myself. That's the kind of thing I hear once you get below the homosexual attraction. And so, yes. Oh, and that includes anger too, by the way. Most of you probably heard of grief processes. Reparative therapy, the authentic kind, it's in major ways, it's a grief process. But the grief process that gets one unstuck instead of being stuck. Because when a guy is finally ready or able to face the causes of homosexuality, these feelings come up. And I assure you, every single, in my opinion, every single guy, boy or man, who's either same-sex attracted or actually full-on gay identified, this is what they're feeling because of these experiences or similar experiences that I've described. Every time they are having an issue with homosexual feelings. I know that's a bold statement for me to say, but my colleagues all agree, who do this work, they all agree it's the same thing. I have an open mind. In fact, I counseled a gay guy. I'm still counseling a gay guy where I thought, you know what? His situation seems to be a little bit different. I'm just having an open mind. Maybe there's something. Maybe he's different, you know. But sure enough, after 3 months, the same things come to light. And so, as a therapist, I witness these guys going through tears and pain and battling through this soul-killing thing we call shame. They're so sensitive to trauma and so undone by shame that it's really tough work. The authentic reparative therapy is tough work. It works for various reasons. Maybe not for every single person based on several reasons. I can discuss those later. Because sometimes it's training for therapists, sometimes it's a motivation problem. But every single guy who's dealing with this, in my opinion, in my experience, this is what you find underneath. So, he'll finally, in other words, even though this is very painful and angering, the point is that he finally has uncovered below the false self, below the homosexual feelings, what's really going on. And hopefully, because the therapist has been trusting enough, he can be a witness so that guy won't be alone. Because something, you probably know this in spiritual terms, when a brother or sister shares your pain, the road's easier, is it not? We bear each other's burdens. God was pretty serious, and I'm so thankful that he put that in his word, to bear each other's burdens. Because for me, in a spiritual sense at least, that's what I'm there to do, is to help this boy or this man bear his burden. Because these guys, it's ironic. They have to learn to be their own, and feel and experience their own individual manhood, but they can't do it alone. And none of us can. So, go back. So that's why, as you see on the slide there, grief, which includes grief itself and anger, has to be experienced, because that's the pathway to the real self. I believe that God created an automatic, we know how to unconsciously hold on to ourselves, our save ourselves mentality, that it's automatic, that self-preservation mode, where our bodies are designed to self-preserve. When you get a cut, your body heals naturally, spontaneously. You don't look at it and say, I want to be healed, please do so. It happens. I believe the same thing exists with these issues as well. So not many people know this, but that's what happens when a guy is finally able to face these issues. When he's grieved enough, as a therapist, I see him take a breath, just like regular grief work. He finally kind of comes up and feels more real, and he feels better because he's faced the truth, even though it's been really hard. And here's the key. He feels better about himself, and then he's ready to get the real needs met that he's never had before, like a strong sense of powerful, God-given masculinity in his own body. He's ready to have healthy relationships. I'm describing a long process in a very short period of time. You got to know that. But nonetheless, this is what happens. So, finally, those things. The short story is finally those things are resolved. The root causes, and spontaneously, that false self starts to develop, and he gets back to his growing male identity. So the shamed self is in what we call the assertive or authentic self, as God designed us to be free of all those things. There's healthy male self-esteem that some guys, in some cases, hardly felt anything, if any of that, before. And here's a big, big point that the world is not telling you. They just don't believe it. When a guy is in the assertive state after he's done this, there is a natural, automatic dissipation, or lessening at least, of homoerotic impulses. For instance, at the end, let's say at the end of 40 minutes in the session, we go back to that guy, his remembrance of that guy who he was sexually attracted to. And in a best case scenario, what do you think he tells me when I ask him to just kind of look in his mind at that same guy? What do you think he tells me after he's moved into what we call the authentic self? Give me 3 guesses. No volunteers? That's when he says things like, wow, I don't feel attracted to him sexually anymore. I want to be him. That's the change process. That's the moment that nobody wants you to know about. That's the moment that I'm telling you about that's possible through therapy that is, even though it wasn't designed this way, it just happens to complement sound biblical principles. This, after several months, I hear things like, not every guy, but I've heard automatic, without me asking them, they just up and volunteer. Some guys look at me and say one day, David, you know what? This whole manhood thing that I'm feeling, this feels a lot better than sex with guys. This is the authentic self. I'm not asking them, hey, have you changed? Never do that. Never. These things come up automatically. So if this is happening spontaneously, truthfully, and they're being true to their feelings, not repressing their homosexual feelings, resolving their homosexual feelings, that indicates 2 strong things that the world is trying their best not to tell you, is that change is possible, and it's not inborn. Because if it was something that was naturally inborn by God as its author, there would be nothing that boy or man could experience that would have any kind of change effect on him at all. But I see it almost every day in my office. Now, do those guys need a lot more work? Does one time do it? Of course not. Most guys are in therapy for a year or 2. And some, because they have additional issues that are extreme issues, they're in there for a very long time. So what? So what? I'm there to, and my colleagues are there to help them through any issues they have. So this is what's going on. This is what the media won't tell you on TV or on the internet. This is what gay activists will strike out in the most vociferous, obscene language that you can look on the internet right now when we say things like this to them. We're not even telling people that they can't be gay. You can be gay. But we're not going to stifle, neither do you have a right to stifle the voice of people who have religious rights in this country, or therapeutic rights in this country. You don't have a right to silence people's voices. So that's why I'm being so strong today in telling you all these things. And then, an important point, maybe for the rest of his life, a guy, because he's had such a deficit of these male needs, he's going to need strong male affirmation, approval, and affection. And so, if you're a wife, a man who's dealing with this, or a boyfriend, girlfriend situation, or son, daughter, whatever, you're going to need to know that positive male influence is absolutely necessary. And in the next segment later on today, I'm going to talk about how the church can actually help facilitate what a boy or a man really needs, instead of just a Sunday morning, hi, how you doing? Okay. All right. And then some men who want families and marriage, they can develop attractions for women. We've seen it. It doesn't happen for every man. That's okay. Some men are called and are very happy leading celibate lives. Because most of the guys I see are people of faith, I help them, if they ask me and they want to do that, I help them realize how rich their lives can be getting their male needs met. Some guys have been so bereft of these male needs, they're really on a journey in their life to just get what they need. And it happens, in some cases it happens for the rest of their life, because they don't particularly want to have relationships with women, and so we don't need to force that. This therapy and our spirituality shouldn't be forcing anybody into anything. You're going to hear on the internet, you've got your iPhone, you can look it up right now, you're going to hear that people like me coerce and force people to do this work, and it's all a lie. You're going to hear, you can look it up right now, that we think gay people are mentally ill. It's all a lie. I don't believe people are mentally ill. There are some deep emotional issues, sure. People go to therapy for all kinds of issues, not just for some diagnosable grave issue. So you need to know that, because if you have any dealings with anybody with these issues, you're going to hear all these things come up. So I want you to be prepared. All right, so I'm just going to go real quick through some of this right here. These are just kind of visual depictions. I can bring up a million different pictures, but all in a visual way, this expresses the underlying things that happen to a kid. You'll notice, top left, there's a bully, and the guy seems defenseless. The one on the right, upper right, this is, if you want to look at this boy really closely. What is he feeling in this picture? Intimidated. There's shame. What else? Rejected. Yeah. See his hands? What's the other big feeling? Yes. He looks terrified to me. That's the kind of prolonged experience that at least many guys dealing with these issues deal with. So you need to know that. That's one thing that comes up in session. That's one thing is what it feels like. Now, I want to make a big point here. I'm not saying one incident like this will change a boy's life or make him homosexual. I'm not saying that. I'm saying during the developmental years, when it happens all the time, when it happens enough, and there's no emotionally corrective or connective experience, that's what we're looking at. Okay? And then what do you think the bottom left picture suggests? Enmeshment with them, mom and son. And this picture actually made me fine. I didn't choose these pictures because I know these guys are having homosexual problems. They're off the internet. But to me, it looked a little bit like mom was probably too enmeshed with son. I mean, she's really wrapped it around him. And that kind of represents a physical and emotional boundary issue that might be true. It's kind of guessing. And then the lower right, this is how that kid ends up feeling. He's alone. He doesn't know what to do. Head in his hands. And inside of this grown-up man, when he grows up, there's actually a little boy. And this is the picture of what's going on inside. And that's what we get down to in heal. Like the saying goes, we say, you feel and heal what's really going on, and things change. A person changes. That's what it's said. I think that's pretty spiritual as well. All right. And then, so the pictures I'm going to give you of what's supposed to happen is nowhere near a definitive portrait of what should happen, but you can get some hints at least. This is the kind of thing, some of it's kind of Norman Rockwell, of course, but these are the kinds of things that really set a guy up when they're consistent. That for, I think most guys, in some form or fashion, happens generally. That doesn't happen for a guy dealing with these issues. to a large extent. And then, of course, naturally, automatically, at some point, when he's a young man, he finds a woman that he's attracted to, and it's that wonderful God-given mystery of opposites attract. The Bible says it's a mystery, paraphrasing, but it's a mystery between a man and a woman, what goes on. And it's a wonderful mystery, and it leads to a healthy sex life. And hopefully, marriage as God designed it. All right. Just some quick statistics about sexual abuse. Yes, it happens. This is an important statistic. You can check it out yourself if you like. Psychology is a soft science, so it's not strict science like math and biology. So, just so you know, research is harder to do, harder to pin down. However, most studies show that there's somewhere between 50 to 75% of homosexual men have been sexually abused. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it, probably, in my experience at least, in many churches, because we're all so embarrassed to talk about things that we don't want to deal with. But that's what's going on. You also need to know that whenever you come into contact with even the most vociferous gay activists. I don't let them cross my boundaries, I'm strong with them, but I have compassion for these guys. I know what they've been through. And yes, it happens within the church itself. This is quite alarming. I think the stats actually have changed. I think they're worse, but I couldn't prove that right now. So basically, this is not far off, it's not incorrect. Basically, 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused, and about 1 in every 7 or 8 boys are sexually abused as well. So if that's true, there's a lot of abused kids walking around that aren't talking about it. So we need to start. I'm in favor of sex education, big time, in the home, not in the school, unless it's basics. Basics are fine. But real sex education, that needs to come from a close-knit relationship between daughter and mother and son and father. That's where they need to learn all about what it's like to be secure in their gender and sexuality and what happens in sexual matters. I don't have time to go through this. We're stopping at 20. Yeah, so I don't have time to read over this. This is a marvelous story of a guy who was totally involved in gay relationships, and when he heard the truth, not just spiritually but emotionally, the bells just went off, and it changed him so profoundly. He had these kind of experiences that I've been talking about. A therapy client, not mine, but another colleague's, and the emotional change and spiritual change, but nevertheless, the emotional change, not just behavior. I want to stress that. We're not talking about just simply not acting out, white knuckling it. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, especially if we're men of faith, we need to bear up under temptation, and that's good and righteous and wonderful. But we're talking in these issues right now about emotional change, because we felt and dealt with what's really going on. So, one of my gifts to you, if you want to take advantage of it, is all you have to do is take my card, email me, and I will give you this entire program so that you can read it for yourself, so you can review it. So you email me, it's a PowerPoint program. You can pull it up on your computer, you can have it forever. And you can show other people if you like, or you can just have it for yourself in your own references, and it'll have a lot of resources on there. And this is one I want to encourage you to look at this guy's story. And this is one of thousands of stories. Again, the media is not telling you about. For instance, let's say Megan Fox, who's magnificent on the TV. Megyn Kelly on Fox News Network. Probably everybody knows right now because her career just skyrocketed over the last 2 years. If she, for 5 minutes, this is my estimation, I don't know this for sure, but if for 5 minutes she reported on something like this, my guess is she'd lose her job within 24 hours. Just a guess. That tells you even the conservative networks are kind of really skittish about saying all this stuff. It is improving, by the way. Conferences, churches, they're beginning to rise up. A la Kim Davis, me and my colleagues we're holding conferences Next week, we're holding a very controversial conference in Salt Lake City. It's going to just really take the lid off of everything that America is not being told. So if you want to know more about that information, I'll tell you as well. All right. Oops, sorry. I'm going to stop with that because I've already explained the rest of the slides pretty much. And some of this I'm going to use for the next segment. So, we have about 10 minutes. So I can go on if you want, but I feel like I need to stop in case you guys have any questions. Because you can ask me anything. I'll be happy to give you my opinion on anything you want to ask. Maybe this stuff has brought up some really tough stuff for you. Maybe it's brought up some questions that you don't quite really get. Or maybe you want to share some experiences. I'm open. I'm here for you. Yes, sir.
Does the manifestation of the being held down all those years, is that what we see when we see them out on the street, the activism? We talked about homosexuality and the meanness, the absolute jumping on us and that kind of stuff. Is that kind of connected to that stuffing it down and stuffing it down?
It's a brilliant observation. The short answer is yes. The more lengthy answer is, if all this is true, then what's happening is, because those shame-based individuals were so tied down, were so convinced by other people, and truly were harmed, unjustifiably didn't deserve this. Who deserves this kind of abuse or neglect? If they're not dealing with it, and homosexuality has come to anesthetize, in other words, a sexual pleasure is so pleasurable, it keeps them from going way down deep. It's hard to face these issues. So the problem is that you can't shut that stuff down without it coming up in some way. And there you go. They are, in effect, what we call displacing or projecting what they can't deal with in themselves, so they must, in an automatic, unconscious way, project it onto other people. That's why people like me become absolute, hateful, horrible, bullying people, because I represent what was done to them early in their lives. Does that make sense? Yeah. We need to do our best to prevent, but they're still responsible for their behavior. I mean, let's face it, some kids' lives are so horrible, they end up doing things like murder and mayhem. Well, we don't just excuse that. We still have to, they're still responsible for themselves as adults. They have to still, we have to still expect good behavior or choices. They're still responsible. But it helps a lot to understand the underpinnings of where the stuff comes from. And that's one reason why I have such compassion for even the virulent gay activists. Yes, sir.
I have several questions. I'll try to put them together, I think.
Speak up.
Several questions. I've tried to put them together. Combined with your statement a while ago about it's not mental illness, and in answer to the statement they tend to make that God made me this way, and then you couple that with all the other kinds of sexual issues among heterosexuals included, sex addiction, porn addiction, spouse abuse, promiscuity, and that's just sexual stuff. All the other things that a person could claim that God made me that way as well, could we not? Could, anybody who's a sinner couldn't, why do they get a pass to say they were made that way? Isn't that part of the lie that you're talking about? But more generally, in my family, a registered nurse was opposing what I said about mental illness in this regard. They're not mentally ill. And you said that a while ago. So I'm just ignorant. I mean, I guess it's a stigma, but going to counseling therapy for any reason is not ipso facto mentally ill.
Right.
In fact, it may be more characteristic of mental health that you know that you need to go.
Right.
But what do we need? This is a loaded bunch of questions, but what do we need to unstigmatize the process so that more people who need it, including potentially myself, go?
Right. You just said it. I tell people this all the time. Maybe we need to explain more in detail about this, but you made a very good statement in that you said, I think pretty much a paraphrase of what I said a little while ago, is that people come to therapy for all, that's one of the answers you'll tell people, in my opinion, if you're with it smart. Well, you believe it's mental illness. No, the truth is, here's the statement, people come to therapy for all kinds of undiagnosable issues. Marriage problems aren't diagnosable. How many marriage therapists are there? I can't even count them. They're like grains of sand. They're all over this city and all over the world, actually. So people have some strong emotional issues or hang-ups that are far from diagnosed as being mental illnesses. That's kind of, does that help you to kind of explain it that way?
Yeah, just keep, I mean, you know, I'm going to be a difficult customer, so just...
Oh, good. There's therapy.
Yeah.
No, you raise excellent points. And some of this I think I'm also going to, in terms of how to help, you're going to hear me in the next segment that I do, be more specific about that. Yes, with that.
I believe that the majority of the churches do not address homosexuality from the pulpit, but for those few churches that do, what can they do to try and overcome this problem?
Great question. And the nutshell is that we need to start speaking up. Like in my church just last week, many of the men met together. And I actually gave them the same thing I'm doing today. And they were astounded because people just don't know. So education is things like this, having classes, seminars, things like this, whatever. Education and speaking about it from the pulpit and in classes and individually. And then some kind of individual relationship program or group individual program. And you're going to hear me go into a lot more detail about that in my next segment. So stay tuned, as they say. Yes, sir?
Do you deal with people, young people that feel a latent desire toward homosexuality, and you're dealing with them, they haven't even arrived there yet, but are coming that way?
Yes, the question was, do I deal with latent homosexuality? And yes, I very much do. For some reason, maybe it's providential, the client base has shifted from 35 to 50 years of age to the majority, at least in my practice, of boys or young men who are somewhere between 15 and 29, 30.
Wow.
Which is actually good news, because I want to assure you, the earlier this work is done, the easier it's going to be. So yes, I do. I do have some cases where they really haven't developed full-blown, or certainly not acting out situations, and often that comes from people of faith, because usually they're more conservative. But the techniques or the path is still the same. These kids need, before they act out, if they can, correct heal some wounds inside, the same thing happens. Then they kind of, I don't like the term, but I'll use it. They kind of get back on track onto that journey into manhood. So it's quite beautiful to actually see that in my office. Yeah.
One's just a comment. In my experience,
Louder.
in my experience, the three basic causes, I've found all three of those in nearly every single one of them, not just one of them, but all three of them. Mm-hmm. The second comment that I have is that your experience with the younger men coming to you, young men, with this problem, is an exact mirror of the demise of the family and the departure of the father from the family, which goes back to the three basic causes.
Thank you. And I want to agree with you on that. I think probably most everybody in this audience probably already knows that, but I would like for you to hear me affirm that. We would not have been in the standing on the cliff situation that we are now as a country and maybe as churches, if the family and fatherhood and probably motherhood as well had not gone through the extreme, profound changes and insecurities that we've gotten ever since the 60s. After the 60s, definitions of personhood just kind of started going out the window. And so it is definitely one of the side cause, I guess, these issues, because it's just a simple breakdown of the home and family. Yes, sir.
This is not related. I've been a pastor of military churches for about 30 some odd years, and so PTSD is very, very real. Can I tell them to say louder? I've always thought that the World War II had such a devastating impact on our country that nobody ever knew, and that's why we end up with the 60s. Because all my uncles, people who served, great men, great generation, they were absentee, quiet, withdrawn, and we've had a lot of problems, and I'm seeing that with guys coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And the horrifics of war, and World War II was horrific beyond imagination. And a lot of these guys just came home and nobody ever thought about those kind of things. I think we face the consequences of that today too, and out of all of that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Nobody yet in an audience has brought it up. I thought that same thing, not that I, anyway, yeah, I thought that same thing for years, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's very key. Let's go all the way back to the back there. Sure.
What have you seen as far as homosexuality resulting from broken relationships? Because I think in those dynamics that happen early on in childhood are certainly there, and maybe they play out later on as the male or female are trying to get into relationships and feel rejected. And I think you even see that into married life, where maybe there's been divorce, and a person repeatedly going through divorce. What's wrong with me? And then they start looking, well, maybe this person, I can't identify with males, but I can identify with the female. And I've seen this in my own family. Through the grace of God, my relative got over it, but they were in a heterosexual relationship. Things went awry. A cousin came in, female cousin came in, befriended my female relative, homosexual union, for 13 years. We prayed as a family for this person, for both of them. In time, that relationship broke. My relative ended up finding a male who she identified, and in this time, other situations, divorce primarily in her early family. Her stepfather came in, provided a loving, nurturing relationship with her, and in time, she was able to find somebody, married, is now pregnant, and life goes on.
Yeah, thank you.
Praise God.
Yeah, it's very significant. That's one of those individual kind of, sometimes the same but a little bit different situations that I'm not talking about today, but I'm glad you brought it up because that kind of thing happens. Some guys or women, they are able somehow through emotionally corrective experience, either by providence or of God, or they happen to have a family that actually supports them and doesn't reject them, and they can see, maybe their ego strength is high enough to where they can see clearly some of these issues, and they're able to turn and actually facilitate change in more of an automatic way. They don't necessarily have to go to therapy, in other words, but they probably still benefit by therapy. But you know, what you're describing is a wonderful experience, and you'll notice what you said was, there's something wrong with me. That's the shame component that I've been talking about today. And if that can be resolved, that woman or man is going to be on their way to a large extent. Thanks for that. Yes, sir.
In looking at a case where some of these conditions are present, and yet they have not turned towards homosexuality, should we be looking at therapy for them? Just because I guess the question is there a risk factor that you ought to be addressing whether or not they've turned to homosexuality? That poor self-image can lead to other things. Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. You're right. And the question was, are there risk factors, and can there be something done? It doesn't really go to homosexuality, but there's some clues in them, and yes, there is. And I'm going to answer that in the next segment when we talk about risks and what you as individuals or a church or whoever can do about it. It's a great question. Yes, ma'am.
What you've been referring to, you can also, of course, for women that have been set free, we can identify to that too, basically.
Yeah.
So you know, it is true because you have the factors of your mom, you know, the relationship also with your father, and so forth. So.
Yeah, great comment. And if you have more questions about that in the next segment, I'll go into that a little bit more. But just so you know, there are differences, but there's some similarities definitely. And usually, there is a lot more sexual abuse by violent male guys that women or girls experience, so it turns them off towards men. That's understandable, I'm sure. But also, there's usually an upset with the female mother, longing for mother, kind of deep-seated issue going on there. We have time, I think, for just one more question, because I'm going to get late, so I'm going to take you, sir.
Okay.
And I'll be available for questions later, so I'm not going anywhere.
You mentioned that when the man detaches himself from his father, he then detaches himself from himself. My question is, where does it come in where the gender identity and the transgender and all? I mean, is it shortened? I mean, is that just part of the issue and you didn't go all the way, or where does that fit in?
Yeah, great question. I'm so you guys are asking so many great questions. Hit the nails on the head. I believe, as most professionals who do therapy or psychologists, even researchers, they believe that actually, given certain circumstances, of course, sexuality and gender tends to be on a continuum. Okay? We need to state right from the onset, which I'm glad you reminded me of this, we're not talking about secure male gender in terms of hyper-machoism. I'm never going to tell you you're going to do a boy a lot of good by just throwing him a football and just saying, hey, great, and he'll turn heterosexual. That's what you'll hear on the internet. We don't do that. It's ridiculous. What happens, though, during whatever that event is happening, whatever the boy with his father or boy with peers, whatever they're doing, even if it's flower arranging, if it feels male affirming to them, what you're after is what's going on emotionally between the male and his male counterparts emotionally while they're doing what they're doing. That's what can be either rough or transformative. And then to answer your question more specifically, transgenderism is way on the other end of that scale. These guys hate masculinity. They're usually something traumatic. I'll talk more about this later, but Bruce Jenner, for instance, I assure you, there was a major traumatic, you can look at his family history, there's a major traumatic emotional splitting experience when he was a young boy between father and mother. Confusion on gender. And he had enough gumption or whatever to just shove all that down. So now, of course, he feels free. But he's still dealing way down deep with this gender confusion. And transgenderism is, indeed, it's even further to the left, where it's almost a complete disidentification with the male identity. Thank you so much. We'll talk more. I appreciate it.